search for Ron Kaufman's bio, and it simply starts by saying Ron is pure energy. And I think what everybody's about to find out is that he truly is that. Ron is the vision behind Up Your Service and is the author of a mere 14 books, with the latest being Uplifting Service. So, Ron, how energized are you at 6:30 in the afternoon after 14 or so telephone interviews?
Well, I got to tell you, it's an incredible privilege to be sitting where I am and doing what I'm doing. The 15th book just launched last week, and it's called Uplifting Service, and it hit number 1 on Amazon Business Books, number 1 on Barnes & Noble, number 1 USA Today, and it just hit the New York Times bestseller list. So that's really a once-in-a-lifetime thing that I put 3 years into writing that puppy, and it's out in the world now, so it's kind of fun to be on the other side of the authorship effort, to be now in the sharing it with the world.
Ron, why do people gravitate to that so quickly?
You know, there's a fundamental definition of service that I use and I introduce very early in the book, which is that service is taking action. I think everybody can agree with that. Service is taking action to create value for someone else. And when we think about usual customer service, well, you know, that's obvious. We take action for the customer. But it also applies to every possible internal position when you're helping your colleagues. And it also applies in our communities when we're working to have a good community with each other. And it applies whether you're on the receiving side of service where you want to be uplifted, but it's also if you're the customer, because the way you behave can have an uplifting impact on the service provider. What goes around comes around, so it comes back to you. So I think this whole idea of uplifting service is something that all of us, it describes the world in which we live, but we don't tend to talk about it that way, and so it's resonating with a lot of people.
Well, we're living in a time where at least it seems like it's never been easier to connect and to collaborate with your customers and consumers, yet we're also living in an era, Ron, where service, by and large, is at its poorest. Where are we going wrong?
Right. Well, you put your finger on both pieces there, which is just because the technology is enabling connectivity doesn't mean that that is actually bringing about the fundamental shift in the way people are approaching being in service to other human beings. So there's a cultural crisis that has come about that you talked about there, which is that, you know, lousy service is incredibly common. Service providers are more cynical and resentful and frustrated than ever before. Customers are more angry, and they're talking about it more, and it's going viral, you know, more than ever before. And it's kind of a lose-lose-lose proposition. So instead of this negative spiral going down to a place that nobody's going to be satisfied, really the question is, well, hold on a second. You know, where does it begin? Where can any one of us take a stand and do something that will lead to a more uplifting service experience, maybe for the person that I'm serving so that I'm more successful as a service provider, but also for me as a recipient of service. You know, how can I help create a stronger culture of service so that everybody benefits?
Well, you know, my calling in life, I really believe, and it's the reason why I do what I do, is to contribute to the success and to the well-being of others. And when I read that in the beginning of your book, that you mentioned that in your introduction, I started to think, could it really be that simple, Ron? I mean, could it really be that simple, and are we just complicating it?
Oh, I think that the fundamentals of service education should be brought into our school systems, and the children, by the time they're 7, 8, 9, 10, and certainly by the time they're young teens, should be getting this in school. And it's not currently being done, and that's a big part of the problem. So we're graduating people coming out of educational experiences thinking that their technical skills or their professional proficiency is the key to doing well in life. And that crisis that's happening in places like the banking industry is because we've got really smart people coming out in the world thinking that the measure of their success is the size of their bonus or is the shareholder stock price, when those are actually trailing, those are lagging indicators to the amount of value that you should have created for someone else. And the collapse that we've seen in places like the financial services industry is because they forgot that it's called financial service for a reason. Its whole purpose is to take care of other people.
You know, one of the things that I want to get your perspective on, because I think for you, I know you work hard at it, but I know a lot of it is internal. How much is uplifting service innate, Ron?
Well, I think it's innate when you say, like, is it inbred or inborn and not something that can be cultivated. I'm an optimist, and so I'm a guy who's traveled all the way around our planet, maybe 40 round trips in the course of my life around this world. And my passport's as thick as a small Bible. And I've seen that people everywhere would actually prefer to smile than be grumpy, that people like to laugh when it happens, that when you do something that causes somebody else to get what they want or feel appreciated, that it lightens up their life. And that's a fundamental human characteristic. Now, I'm not so naive to say that everybody on this planet is born into nice circumstances. That's certainly not the case yet. But it is the case that when we interact with other people, we have a choice about whether or not to be nice. We have a choice about whether or not the way we engage with another human being is going to be perceived by them as something that's uplifting or something that's complaining. And at that point, I think we have choice and that every human has that choice.
I asked a successful entrepreneur earlier today if they treated potential prospects and first-time customers any different from their best customers, and they said, of course not, and I quote, "That's not always the case, Ron. How do you address this particular issue?"
Well, what you point to here is the difference between what I call a service transaction, which is like close the deal, make the sale, earn the profit, ship the product, cut the invoice, and moving that forward to a service relationship where this is something that endures over time, and then growing that to what I call a service partnership. And the characterization of a partnership is that both parties really genuinely want both parties to do well. So you think about a good marriage, or you think about a great career in a company, or a great relationship with a boss where both parties want each other to succeed. When you get that approach, that perspective with your customer, then you're not just looking to complete a sale and then go on and find the next customer. You want to make sure that that customer gets a lot of value from what they bought. You want to be available for them to teach them how to use what they bought and get more value from it. You want to, of course, get the referral from that customer. You want to get the repeat business from that customer. You want to get the greater share of wallet from that customer. And that's fine. That's totally valid. But the way you get that is by making sure that you're doing more for that customer. You're staying in touch with that customer. You're following up or being proactive in your recommendations to that customer. And that whole way of thinking, like let's cultivate partnerships with our customers, is very different from the transactional model that is so prevalent in the world today.
Well, and I see that prevalent in everything that you do, because I get the sense that involvement and participation are core to your thinking. Talk to me a little bit about how to bring that to life, especially if it's an evolving business who's nimble enough to make those shifts quickly.
Well, there's a fundamental architecture for building what I call an uplifting service culture. And laying out that architecture and showing how different companies and different industries and different cultures and of different sizes have applied that to successfully engineer a service culture inside their organizations. That's what's going on inside that book. And there are really three major elements. One of them is fundamental. It's at the foundation, and that's called service education, not customer service training, where you're just teaching people how to follow a procedure or use a script, but actually educating people in the fundamental principles of service and enabling them and empowering them so that they can think thoughtfully about customer situations or colleague situations and come up with new things to do that will add more value. That's the foundational piece. At the top is this issue of service leadership, and that's really walking the talk, talking the talk, being a role model of great service, not only from the top of the organization, but in every person's life and role. Because you could be the leader on your shift. You could lead your team in how to respond to a certain organization. You know that you can lead the mood of your family just by how you show up in the morning. And then there's another element which I call the building blocks of service culture, and that's the largest part of the book. It's the 12 activities that all big organizations and even small organizations can do to surround their staff with this message of uplifting service when they're hired, when they're oriented, when they're communicated to, when they're compensated, when they hear from customer. There are 12 building blocks of uplifting service. So there's plenty that people can do to build that culture, and that's what the book is all about.
Let's talk about something that's near and dear to your heart, the Singapore. I remember not too long ago watching the Prime Minister of Singapore on Charlie Rose, and he said something to the effect, Ron, that we can't be a first-rate country if we act like a third-rate country. And it really triggered a lot in my mind. You've been heavily involved in that whole region. And today, it's not only an incredible tourist destination, it's a great place for business, and it's an even more progressive thinking community. What's been that shift? How did they go from a third world thinking or country into a first-rate country?
Well, they actually had to confront a crisis. Back in the 1980s, all of the manufacturing that was on the island of Singapore, which is only 5 times the size of Manhattan, all of it was migrating off to China, where it would be lower-cost labor and lower-cost materials. And all of the back-office processing, the paperwork, the back-office banking, et cetera, that was all going to India. All the call centers were going to India and the Philippines and other low-cost locations. So Singapore was confronted by the fact that all it really had was people and a convenient geographic location. There's no oil reserves. There's no agricultural hinterland. It's a tiny place. And so they had to reinvent themselves to continue to create more value for other people. Remember, that's our fundamental definition of service. The problem was that their educational system had trained people to go to work in the factories, which is why Singapore has a reputation of being clean and obedient and on time and efficient. But they had to change the entire way of thinking of the population of the country to be more responsive to new customer needs and requests, to be more service-oriented. And that's why I moved there more than 2 decades ago. And I've really been privileged to be at the core of that national service quality improvement effort. So we've seen it now with Singapore Airlines, one of the top-rated airlines in the world with $6 billion in financial reserves. It's got the #1 top awarded airport in the world. They've got one of the top tourist destinations for conventions. They're leading the world in terms of financial services now. Educational opportunities, medical services are popping up, and it's all become a services-oriented economy.
Well, and it's one thing to start to shift your thinking, Ron. It's another thing to permanently shift it. What's happening there every day for them to continually think of themselves as a first-rate country?
Well, the country realizes that they're so tiny, and there's a phrase in Singapore that makes a lot of sense to Singaporeans. It says, nobody owes us a living. Because the winds of change can blow pretty fast, and when you're a tiny country like that, you have to keep your hand pretty close on the sail and on the tiller. It's not like a huge country like the U.S. where, we can absorb a lot of shocks. Over there, they have to be incredibly conscious about what is their reputation, what action can they take to create essentially more friends in the world and not alienate anyone, how can they position themselves to be able to be valuable to the world, because the world doesn't owe them anything. They really need to invent themselves that way. And so there is an underlying anxiety, like don't take your eye off the ball. But then there's also an ambition. There's an appetite amongst Singaporeans to be #1. And that's really what you heard the Prime Minister talk about on the Charlie Rose interview is that, we have to challenge ourselves. They say, if we can't be better, we better be cheaper. And if we can't be cheaper, we better be better. So they're constantly looking at ways to step up.
And as a citizen of both the U.S. and as a citizen of Singapore, what do you see different? Are they changing faster than, and you live in New York, so you're right in the middle of it. Are they changing faster than we are?
Well, I would say that in that small environment, they've got their finger in the wind every day. What's working, what's not working. And so the dramatic change that's happened in the United States with the financial collapse and, going back as far as 9/11 is, the country has been hit. And there's a certain amount of resentment and some cynicism and some skepticism, and we see it in our political climate here. And there's a lot of complaining that's going around. And I think complaining is something that I won't say that Singaporeans don't do it. They do. In fact, the Prime Minister says that they're world-class grumblers. But it's a kind of grumbling. It's not. It doesn't disable them or disempower them from looking for what action can I take to advance my career, to improve my economic outlook, to take action to improve my community harmony, et cetera, et cetera.
Ron, the Ritz-Carlton and the Marriott are owned by the same family, yet one can charge 2 or 3 times as much for a basic room. What earns the Ritz-Carlton the right to do that, especially when you're from the same infrastructure? And how have they been able to create that mindset to say, I'm worth 3 times as much?
Yeah, I love it. The way I'm going to answer your question is to point at and illustrate one of those 12 building blocks of service culture that I referred to earlier. And this is actually the second of the 12 building blocks. It's called an engaging service vision. And what I mean by that is not the mission statement on the wall that nobody remembers. I mean it's got to be some phrase that is engaging for the people in that organization. And the version at the Ritz-Carlton is what they call their credo. And I don't care whether you call it a credo, a vision, a mission, a guiding principle, a slogan, a tagline. I really don't care. What I care is it engaging? And theirs is this: we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
And with that simple, engaging phrase, you think about who is naturally drawn to want to work there. For the people who do get a job, how do they walk in every day, and naturally, how are they guided to treat each other? Nobody's going to pound on the table in a meeting. You're not going to find a boss that yells at their staff, because that wouldn't be ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And they're delighted that even their customers know that that's their service vision, because then it calls forth a certain kind of customer who also naturally treats the staff that way. And so this is a fundamental building block of an uplifting service culture. And the Ritz-Carlton is one of several world-class best practice examples.
And they're certainly amongst the best. A couple more questions for you, Ron. All of us in some way, shape, or form serve. And I know you say it's the gateway to fulfillment, it's the gateway to satisfaction, it's the gateway to the light. Put that in context for me, because if each one of us does a little bit of our part, you mentioned if you want to be served well, be a great consumer, and I haven't heard that from anybody. Kind of put that whole vision in context for me.
Well, the big context of that is making a fundamental shift from walking around in life thinking, what's in it for me, to walking around in life thinking, what can I do for you? If you live with a certain confidence that what goes around does come around, that when you take good care of other people, the world is going to come back and take good care of you. When you see profit not as the goal, but you see profit as the applause that you get, it's the applause that you earn for achieving the goal, and the goal is taking good care of other people. That shift from what's in it for me and what do I get to what can I do for you and how can I serve you more, that's the fundamental shift. That puts it all in context.
And my last question to you is this. You've been around a lot of cultures. Some cultures are simply better than others at serving. What are you finding as the common DNA today as we live in this hyper-connected technological world with these companies that are creating this incredible uplifting service?
Yeah, I'm finding that their fundamental focus is on the experience that they create for the people they serve. And that could be as much an internal department, human resources, finance, IT, facilities, security, legal, administration. If they come to work not thinking, I'm just here to do my job, nobody can fault me, I hit my KPI, that's one point of view. The other is to say, my job here is to help my colleagues. My job is to enable their success. And so when you look at that internal or external, and so you look at somebody like Apple and what they're doing at the Genius Bar, where, you walk in and they are never going to rush you. I mean, their whole mission is just to make sure that you're delighted. Why? Because they believe that you're going to come back. They're not there to sell you a thing. They're there to make sure that you have a great experience. And that's the fundamental characteristic not only of organizations that build the culture, but of individual service providers who can contribute to making that culture happen with their own example.
Well, I can see why now you uplift everybody around you and everybody says your energy is contagious. Ron, how can people learn more about your work? How can they learn about the service offerings that you guys have at UP?
Well, thank you so much. If anyone goes to upliftingservice.com, that's the name of the book, upliftingservice.com, and you can download the whole first section for free. And you'll also find there a whole bunch of other resources, all of which are freely available, including high-resolution color posters that you can print out and put up around your office. There's free video there. Of course, there's a blog and there's a YouTube channel. But basically, just go to upliftingservice.com and then explore there and find the value, find the resources that will help you most.
Thank you. I hope you have no more interviews tonight.
Thank you so much. I want you to know how much I've enjoyed this interview with you and how much I admire the commitment that you are and that you have to bringing all of this uplifting information from so many authors out into the world. I really admire what you're doing at 33 Voices.
Thank you so much.